How are you, Kate?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing all right. I'm doing all right. It's been quite a long day, but I'm doing really well, and I've been really looking forward to this. So I'm excited.
Yeah, me too. Where are you? Are you on the West Coast?
I'm in the UK, so yeah,
Okay, it is quite a bit of a time difference for
yeah.
you.
So are you on the East Coast then?
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
in
Okay.
Boston.
5 hours. It's not too bad. So it's the end of your day then. Your day's kind of wrapping up.
Yeah, more or less. Although I do like to work at nights, so I still have a couple good hours in me yet.
Okay. Good
It's
stuff.
fun.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
Have you been pretty busy with interviews then? You had quite a few booked in.
Yeah, they're starting to kind of ramp up. I've done a few and it's really exciting. Each time I think I get a little bit more and more comfortable, just kind of talking off the cuff. But yeah, it's been so exciting, and I'm getting text messages from people from all over showing the book, finding the book in the bookstore and,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
oh, it's so exciting to see it in the flesh. So yeah, it's been great.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, the translation from all that work into seeing something in people's hands that you've created is it's an amazing feeling. Yeah, wow. It's great.
Unbelievable. It's kind of surreal, right? Yeah, to see it come to fruition and from just a collection of documents on the computer screen to this book that's out in the world, and now other people are reading it.
That's so exciting. I'm really excited for you. That's amazing. Well, we should get cracking because I don't want to keep you going all day if your day's wrapped up or mostly wrapped up. How are you doing for time? Are you okay for usually about an hour and a half or so? Is that all right?
Yeah, that works great for me. I've got as long as you.
Perfect. Cool.
Yeah.
This podcast, you do whatever you want, say however you want, be whoever you want. You're not going to offend or upset anyone. To give you an idea of the general audience, it's generally speaking, it's people that have transitioned outside of more fundamental forms of religion, either
Right.
into atheism, agnosticism, or reimagining maybe some of the faiths they've come from, or re-exploring new faiths and spiritualities. And so it's a
Yeah.
huge, broad range of people that probably the only commonality is they don't like kind of their traditional path that they were brought up in.
Right.
And so I think it's a perfect audience for, your book, so many of them questioning and exploring new ways of exploring spirituality. And generally speaking, most of them came from backgrounds where spirituality was not something that you explored in. It was quite rigid and firm and, whatever. I have to confess up front, I've been really ill the last month. And one of the side effects has been my vision can be really distorted and blurred when I try and focus. And I haven't read your book. I'm really sorry. I've been sitting wanting to. So if you're wondering, gosh, this guy doesn't know half the stuff that he should know from reading a book. I usually try and read books if I've got people on the podcast. But if you're wondering, that's just why I was well intentioned, but it just never got to coming about. Maybe if either I'll get better or I'll pick up the audiobook.
I prefer audiobooks anyways. I love it when someone just reads to me and tells me the story. And also being an academic and
Absolutely.
having to read constantly and have my eyes focus on the computer screen, especially so much, I love audiobooks.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, well, I'm sorry
There
that you. Oh, that's terrible.
it's weird and it's life and life has these ups and downs and it's good. It reminds us we're alive. So it's all good. I'm all good. Yeah, I've faced much worse hardships in my life. So, I mean, it's all perspective. But yeah,
Yeah,
I know what you mean about reading it. I mean, I do a lot of research and stuff. We do research into this community of people that are leaving faith, predominantly evangelical Christianity. And you spend so many hours a day reading papers and academic stuff. You read lots of books that are, generally speaking, not your page turner, Harry Potter, John Grisham. They're pretty grim,
it's
most of them, and dull and whatever. And I love data, so I actually kind of love it. But also, the last thing I want to do sometimes is just pick up a book to relax. I'm like, no, give me an audiobook, give me a podcast, give me a movie, give me anything other than a book to sit down and read. So unless I'm on holiday, I'm very rarely picking up books for fun.
completely can identify with that.
I love it. I love it. Right. Well, let's get cracking, Kate. I'm really excited to have you. Do you want to kind of give a rough overview of kind of who you are for people that are kind of tuning in to hear a bit about you and your book? Like, who are you? What's your background? Why did you write this book?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I was raised in the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America, which is actually not sort of the same application of the word evangelical that you often
Right.
hear. A little bit misleading for me to lead with that, but the ELCA is a mainline denomination of Lutheranism that's fairly progressive, right? So there was maybe in like 2009, I think, for example, the ELCA decided to be open and affirming to all the LGBTQ IA community, right? And so that did create some tension within the denomination. Some churches decided to leave the denomination and go to a different sort of synod of Lutheranism and things like that. So, but my church was one that was the church that I grew up in was one that chose to stay and to just totally embrace that and lovingly just, totally accepting and celebrating of LGBTQIA. So, so that was kind of where I came from, and I was always, I have just such a deep fondness for my tradition, even though I have, over the years, I'm a scholar of religion. So of course, like I've had my own kind of deconstructive process in terms of like really deciding which beliefs I'm going to hold on to. And
yeah, you see how the sausage is made a little bit once you kind of dive into the historicity of it, the context and the sociology. And
Exactly. And learning just about all the world's traditions and stuff. I see so much kind of valuable and just really beautiful traditions from all over the world. And so I've kind of reconstructed my own sort of spiritual understanding that's a lot from where I came from. But I do credit my the environment that I was raised in, and the pastor that we had at our church was just always interested in questions and always interested in kind of being willing to kind of go there and challenge your ideas and challenge beliefs and just really read the texts in a critical way, kind of understanding where did this text come from? What was the historical context in which it arose? So actually a very scholarly perspective. I mean, it wasn't presented in a scholarly, it really had that kind of ethos to it. So I feel really just so lucky really to have had that kind of beginnings, and so when I went to college, it was very natural. I loved asking those questions. And so it was very natural for me to study religion because I had really enjoyed my my confirmation process, which was really just for our confirmation classes, we wrote our mission statement as a human, when we wanted to be, I suppose. And so I really enjoyed that. And so when I got to college, I double majored in religion and psychology. And so our psychology program was pretty scientific in terms of like, rather than clinical, it was more kind of research. It was interesting. And so for that reason, I sort of developed almost like two languages, two ways of writing. Psychology research articles are a different style of writing.
Yep.
Let's just like religion, article or book. So I developed these kinds of two ways of thinking and ways of knowing, and then always just did everything I could do to kind of put them together and to kind of understand the psychology of religion and understanding ways that religion could learn from the psychology literature, and ways that psychology literature was kind of missing aspects of the religious dimension of human experience. So ever since my undergrad years, I've been interested in these kinds of questions. And so that kind of, snowballed, and I did a master's degree, and now I did my PhD. And this book kind of emerged from an interest in both those kinds of psychology of religion type of questions, also this like history of religions, understanding that, human religion has gone through different kinds of manifestations over the span of Homo sapiens as we know them, right? And we're seeing this moment where we are having a lot of people really challenge and question maybe the religions in which they grew up, and maybe at one time these traditions did hold a lot of kind of grounding and stabilizing forces in our communities. And now it seems that people are really playing with that on a level that we haven't seen before in history. We're seeing people kind of deconstruct and reconstruct their own understanding of spirituality. And a lot of that has to do with scientific understandings of the brain, of how the body works, how our bodies interact with other human bodies. You know, we're kind of almost like rediscovering some of these embodied notions of spirituality that maybe actually used to be more intuitive in certain types of maybe shamanic traditions and things like that. These kind of trauma healing practices, embodied somatic practices. So anyways, my co-author Wesley and Wesley is also my PhD advisor. So I learned a lot of my, kind of ways of approaching and thinking from him, of course.
Sure.
But yeah, we were just really interested in kind of like what is happening in this little, large kind of sprawling community of folks who are really taking seriously this brain science and applying it to create technologies that can actually be used for spiritual enhancement. So yeah, that was kind of a long and meandering answer to your question, but
it's good. It's good. This is why I do long forms, so I can give people, they feel free to go, I want to go into some depth here. I want to go into like the nitty gritty, and we'll probably end up off on totally bizarre rabbit trails. Who knows where we'll go? But there's the freedom to do that with a bit more time. And so I appreciate length and depth. So that's what I'm all about. That sounds so fascinating to me. So something you said that kind of jumped out at me is, when you first kind of did your undergrad, you've got this cross section between religion and philosophy. And you talked about how philosophy often overlooks some of these religious, spiritual components that can be so healthy. And religion often overlooks some of these kind of philosophical kind of approaches. Like, what are some of the gaps that you see in those kind of disciplines that, one can bring to the other? I'm sure a lot of people listening can probably go, well, I can give you a list of all the things that religion misses from psychology, because that's maybe a lot of our backgrounds, as we were heavily steeped in a lot of religion that maybe didn't value psychological practice or values or knowledge as much. But I've not heard many people from the insides talk about maybe how religion and spirituality could bring something to the philosophical, the psychological kind of discipline. Can you talk a bit to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting. Like you said, I do think that a lot of folks are maybe familiar with sort of some of the gaps that exist with, even in terms of how we conceptualize the healthiest ways to think about a higher being, especially if sometimes God or a higher being is understood sort of as a parental figure. And then you've got interesting overlaps with attachment styles and things like that, that religion can learn a lot, or the way that religious institutions decide to structure and kind of shape their teachings can learn a lot from some of this psychology research, like you said. But yeah, so if I focus rather on the other angle, what can psychology learn from religion? That is an interesting question. And it's a little bit harder to answer, of course, but like I kind of mentioned a couple minutes ago, I do think that there's a real depth of wisdom that comes from different types of traditions from all over the world. And it's always mixed up with all of the other aspects of religion, right? Religion is kind of an eminently human thing, right? It has corruption. It has power dynamics. It has, different forms of religion have upheld patriarchy to such a degree that is breathtaking for many of us, right? To kind of see this happen in the way that these huge institutions kind of work together to create really hierarchies that have been really damaging throughout the world, right? But there's also this insight into mindfulness practices, things like that. I mean, psychology and neuroscience are kind of rediscovering the benefits of things like contemplative practices. And contemplative practices are things that we see all over the world. It's not only, Buddhist meditation, Zen meditation, right? It's also prayer and silence, and also the dynamics, the communal dynamics of things like religious rituals are so powerful, you know, and the community building practices that religions have really cultivated. And some would say, from an evolutionary perspective, that's why religions are so successful, is because they build community, right? And if you stop, that's one of the things I think, you know, in people I've talked to and in my own self, like when people leave their tradition, they miss that, you know, because there's something
absolutely.
I mean, I think especially, you know, especially considering the past year that we've had with the COVID-19 pandemic, it's like people, we feel how much we need community, and multi-generational communities, communities that are kind of, that sing together. Singing together. How often do people sing together except for at religious ritual services? That's such a, it does. And there's research on this, right? There's research that singing together in groups, especially amateur singing, it doesn't actually work that well if you're a professional singer, because you're sort of focused on being good at it. But amateur singers get a huge boost of oxytocin in their system, healthy kind of, you know, so anyways, from that perspective, thinking about the therapeutic potential of different kinds of practices that have traditionally been seen kind of within the religious realm, you know, contemplative practices, communal building practices, things like that. I don't know. I think that in a way, psychology is rediscovering those. And I think that if willing to kind of really recognize and admit that these are practices that are really ancient, we can maybe more, you know?
Yeah.
Another example really quick is, and one of the things that we talk about in the book is psychedelic medications. So psychedelic assisted psychotherapy is one of the most promising and just incredible forms of trauma release and treatment, and end of life care. It holds such potential, and we're still kind of figuring that out with the research, you know. And of course, these things aren't readily available legally yet, but those kinds of practices, you know, ayahuasca ceremonies, peyote ceremonies, these things have been happening for eons, you know, in kind of spiritual contexts. So those are some ways, I think.
Yeah. No, those are great. And I'm all about all of that. I love talking about any of these kind of things: contemplation, meditation, psychedelics. I love this stuff. This is why I knew that we would end up having a great conversation. It's so intriguing to me, the shift that we're seeing. And I guess, I mean, this is partly what your book is all about, I guess, but like, you know, we're seeing an evolving of humanity in a way that, you know, the rate that we're changing, and the education available, the information at our fingertips, you know, the change that's happened in the last 20 years is so much greater than the 100 years before that, which is so much greater than what happened in the 1,000 years. You know, I mean, we're just seeing these astonishing changes and developments. And a huge part of that has been a shift away from superstition, tradition, things like that. And we've got this shift away from kind of conventional thinking into kind of modernity and post-modernity. And we value, you know, science and ration and logic, and understanding that shift kind of more from a maybe anthropological level, kind of as a sociological level. It was kind of writing on the wall for religion, most people thought, right? They look at that shift and go, well, religion's going to be done. Maybe not everyone's going to change, but by the time their grandkids are around, there's going to be no one in churches. There's going to be no one in mosques. Like, this is just going to die. And it's really intriguing to me that, yes, organized religion in countries that are developed to a state where everyone has access to such education and things like that does seem to be in rapid decline. We can't speak for maybe other areas and other countries that are in the majority world that maybe don't have such access to such privileges. Religion seems to be doing just fine there, if not growing. But it does seem in these kind of very universally educated places that religion in an organized sense is declining. And yet it doesn't seem to be. I've read dozens of studies now, and the numbers seem to bounce between about 60 to about 85% of people that leave organized religion claim to still hold some sort of spirituality. And it seems that there is some sort of divide there between people's holds to tradition, religion, maybe even conventional understandings of the divine, of God, things like that. There seems to be maybe a departing from some of that, but there is something that's holding people to spirituality. And it does seem that our ration, our logic, our technology, if it's not hindering that, it might even be potentially bolstering it in some ways. Like you're talking about, some of the cutting edge research out there is going, wow, these psychedelics work great. Maybe we should be listening to some of these like ayahuasca shamans in Peru. Or gosh, look what meditation does. Look at the brain under an MRI when you meditate. Maybe we should listen to some Buddhists that have been up mountains for the last 2,500, 3,000 years doing this. Like maybe we should look at what they have to say. Or it's a really interesting dynamic. Do you have thoughts on, what is it that you, in your kind of study, what is it that you've observed in this kind of shift, this secularization shift away from kind of a religious kind of framework that most of society has been built around for as long as we've had societies? That's disappeared, but there does seem to be a huge interest in spirituality as a whole. Do you have thoughts on that?
Totally. I love that conversation. And this is kind of what drives a lot of my research, even beyond this book, is this question. Because I do kind of take a large view of human history. A lot of times I do like studies of the evolution of religion. And just kind of how humans evolved to become religious creatures. This is something we do. We create religions the world over. There is no human society that doesn't have religion. And so it's very difficult for me think that a future human society wouldn't either. It probably will. It just might look totally unrecognizable compared to what we have now. That's potentially the case. There was this, I think in the 80s and around then, there was a huge secularization thesis. That's exactly what everyone saw happening, is that what is sometimes in the literature referred to as the axial age religions, which is the big traditional religions that we have today, that they're disappearing, right? And actually, one of the main scholars who published that work, named Peter Berger, who is a just brilliant mind, did something that very rarely scholars do. He actually published follow-up articles and said, "I think I was wrong." Like that's to the end of his career. He said, "Oh no, that's actually not what's going to happen," and he amended his theories to make given the data and what he saw and the further thinking that he had done. So on the one hand, we are obviously seeing a process of secularization. Does that mean that religion is disappearing like we once thought maybe it meant? No. It means something about perhaps that our societies are becoming, there's an interesting new kind of separation maybe between public and private. So whereas religion used to have a larger public presence and kind of, more overarching kind of, this is the way that we organize our societies, maybe there's some process of kind of individualization. Religion is kind of a private thing. It's a spiritual thing that you do and you figure out on your own. And then you create communities, kind of sub-communities that exist under kind of the larger societal umbrella, which is why we can so successfully, which is debatable, live with pluralism in diverse societies, right? We don't have to all believe the same thing. Like that's the dream, of course, right? That we can have that diversity with a lot of peacefulness. And I think that process of kind of this idea, at least, at least in the US, there's like this idea, right, that we have a separation between church and state. And you can argue all day about whether we actually do, because there's plenty of where
you might be one of the countries that does it worst, if anything.
That's exactly right, which is ironic, right? That now, given the whole intention to create a separation, the opposite happens. And that's not an accident, I don't think. I think this is part of the way that humans think about our communities and ourselves and how we strive to kind of create moral codes and understand good and wrong. And we don't need to get into politics, but it's a complicated system, right?
Right.
So, so one of my real questions and kind of the things that drives a lot of my research is kind of trying to get to the root of why and how human beings and human communities cultivate religious and spiritual groups, behaviors, practices, beliefs. So it's not only why do we have this urge to ask about the beyond, or why do we have this kind of intuition that maybe there is there's something to the spiritual side of life, you know? So many people have experiences that they would call spiritual, or maybe have experiences of, you know, loved ones who have died and who have come to visit, these kinds of things. You know, they have this sense that there is something beyond. Like, I don't, you know, maybe they would say, I don't believe in heaven and hell, and I don't believe in all that stuff, but there's something, right? So, but it's not only that, it is that. And then there's also this other side of the way that humans really want to engage in ritual type practices together, and how that feels good. You know, it feels good to be part of a group, especially part of a group that is rooted in something meaningful, you know, or rooted in some kind of a heritage of some sort that feels like it has some stability, not only in the past and the present, but also the future, you know, that there's something to hold on to. And given the kind of structure of our current world with like social media and you know, remote working, and just the way that we create community is different now than it ever has. I don't think we've really figured it out yet. You know what I mean? But I'm fascinated to see how that will affect how it is that we do religious and spiritual practices in the future, you know?
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
One of the chapters talks about a church that exists entirely in virtual reality, you know? So people put on their virtual headsets, go to church. And I think for some people that community has been transformative. And maybe for people who have never actually stepped foot in a brick and mortar church, you know? So yeah, it's very... I don't think there's any way for anybody to know. So it's, for that reason, it's kind of a fun thing to think about.
Yeah, it's interesting observing over the last year, just talking with people that have been going through these processes of evolving, changing, shifting in their faith. I've talked to so many people that have said, oh, I was in this place where I wanted to leave church. I didn't really know how to even begin to do it. And church kind of shut down, and it was like, ooh, clean break. But I've also talked to a lot of people that were like, you know, I just thought maybe I didn't believe what my church believed. Maybe I need to explore some new church. And the fact that I could suddenly jump on like 5 Zooms in 5 weeks and explore 5 different churches, and no one in my church would know, right? No one knows that I'm on another church and visiting another church, quote unquote. And it's just really fascinating. And a lot of them going, oh, and that showed me that I just didn't want anything to do with any of it. Like I got a clear picture of like, no, it doesn't matter which denomination or, you know, which pastor or house type the genes are or whatever. It's really intriguing to me, these models that are suddenly available, because I've also talked to people that have said, I just was so done with church, but because suddenly I could just flick on Zoom and I could blank the screen and mute my mic and just watch and participate in a safe way where I didn't feel I was going to be jumped on and tried to be converted or hounded into coming along to a membership class, or, you know, or picked at because I've got a tattoo, or looked differently at because I'm Black, or whatever, right? Looked badly upon because I've got a boyfriend that I'm living with, or, you know, the list is so endless for a lot of people that suddenly just disappeared. It was a safe place to engage with. Or people that have created these online networks on Facebook groups and pages or Discord servers and things like that. It's incredible to see the way that can build community. It's in no way, shape, or form anything like going to the pub with 20 people and having drinks and laughs and sharing stories and laughing with people as they laugh and crying with them when they're hurting. And, you know, nothing is like that. Nothing to me really will fit that gap in an online space. At least it hasn't yet. But in another sense, that going to a pub isn't there for me like some of these online spaces are 24/7, You know, I've got a Patreon group that meet online, and we talk all day, every day. We're messaging, we're checking in with each other. How are you doing? What's going on? How did that conversation with your family go? Oh my gosh, that must have been terrible. You know, like, what do you guys think about this? I just watched this podcast and it's triggering as hell. Like, you know, is it just me? Or, you know, suddenly that is so much more there for us than maybe something like a traditional church. It's just not so cut and dry. But it is really interesting to see, you know, is there a future that it feels like the future we're building of this more and more individual religious and spiritual practice? It does feel like it grates against human nature on some level. It does feel like it's pushing against our needs to be in a group, you know, to feel part of something like longevity, like you're talking about there, like, you know, where we can go, yeah, this is where we've come from and this is who we are and this is where we're going and this is what it looks like to join. And because there's a joining process, I belong and I know you belong and I know we're together on this. Like those things, I talk to people every day who miss that, who long for that and don't really know how to begin to build that. Do you have thoughts on what that's going to look like? You know, does it look like these online spaces? Is that good enough? Will that fill the void? Do you see a kind of modern church thing evolving? You know, these kind of maybe like you know, humanists kind of have like humanist church services and things like that, which is great. You know, atheist church services exist. Is that the future? I don't know.
It's so hard. And, you know, I think it's all of the above, right? Because the ability to liberate yourself from a community that is not life-giving is worth it. You know, It's just worth it. And to be able to find like-minded people, whether it's on Discord or Twitter or wherever, like, I agree that these kinds of spaces for especially intimate conversations are life-saving for a lot of people, literally, you know?
Yeah, quite literally. Yeah, absolutely.
And for instance, the VR church pastor that I interviewed for the book, DJ Soto, he does come from an evangelical tradition and actually got a lot of flack from his own tradition for trying to do something in virtual space because everyone just said, like, no, that's not real. Like, you know, baptisms in virtual reality aren't real baptisms. Even if someone, for instance, is homebound and cannot go to a church to get baptized and yet has a transformative experience in this virtual space, because once you put on the virtual reality headset, like, you're there, you're in, your brain really thinks you're present. So he just kind of thought that was so bizarre. Like, why would you close down the possibility of a transformative experience for someone because you don't like virtual space? You know, you don't like virtual reality. Anyways, one of the things that he talked about was just how pleasantly surprised and shocked he was by the diversity of folks who showed up, especially early on. And I haven't talked to him for a while now. It was quite a while that I interviewed him, but, you know, he talked about agnostic and atheist people, or people who had left their tradition and who had no intention of going back, but they saw this on the sort of alt space VR, which I think is like kind of the calendar for that platform. You know, they saw it on the calendar, you stepped in for a couple minutes. It's kind of like exactly what you're saying with, you know, suddenly now that you can just kind of log on with Zoom, it's not as much of an investment as like
I can hit log off. It's no big deal, right? No one's going to come knocking on my door. And who doesn't want to go virtual reality church? I got to check that out, right? I mean, like, on some level, we're all thinking it. I want to check that out.
Well, and what it does is, you know, he talked about how folks would almost just really dive in pretty quickly to intimate conversations about struggles that they're having in their life, about questions about their faith, because there's this level of anonymity.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think especially when they started, now I think the technology moves so fast. But your avatar can really look like you. You know, you can dress up your avatar and make mine have blonde hair and put on some cute earrings and look like me. Or you can make your avatar look like someone else, you know, or you can make it like a robot, or you can make it look like an alien. It just doesn't matter.
That's so great.
And in that space, everybody loves the weirdness, you know, everybody. And yet it still facilitates this intimacy. And even if your avatar looks like an alien, you can talk about your real life. And so it's kind of a nice VR is such a fascinating space. I think there is so much to learn about virtual reality. Side note, there's also what they would call technodelics, like virtual reality, almost kind of like psychedelic type experiences that you have in without any sort of drugs. And so that's a whole nother angle of that conversation of what's a potential of virtual reality. But but anyways, if you think about kind of the science of the tech, when you put on and kind of enter that virtual space, you put on that headset, your brain is tricked. You know that you're in your living room, but your brain thinks that you're with people, you know? And so similarly, like there's this sort of famous VR experience where you're walking a plank, you know?
I was literally going to mention my experience of that. That as you were thinking, I'm like, it's crazy. It's the worst thing I've ever watched, because my wife and I went to a VR place where they do like an hour and you just do lots of experiments. And we did that, and you can watch your partner as they're doing it. And so I'm watching on a TV screen, her going up this lift, like, you know, then an elevator for like dozens and dozens of floors, and it opens up, right? And you've just got the plank and it's just straight out into nothing. And she is like, oh, I don't like this. And I'm watching, I'm like, what an idiot, right? Like, I've just done a bunch of VR stuff as well. Like, I know how immersive it is, but I'm like, that's stupid. Like, it's just a plank. You're in VR. And then it was my turn, because I think you walk the plank and then you're supposed to jump off, right? And you just fall like 80 stories or something. It's just horrible. And I remember you're in the elevator, and you can see in the crack in the elevator, you just see all these kind of like the windows passing by across the street or something. And I remember it opened the door, and literally I can remember to this day the flood of adrenaline that coursed through my body as the wind's kind of howls in the headphones in your ears, and you are literally 80s. And it's kind of cartoony, right? We're not there at the technology where it looks that real. And I am literally going, I'm going to shit myself. I honestly feel sick to the core. My body is coursing with adrenaline. And he's like, all right, walk the plank and jump off. And I am like, Phil, you're walking on tiles. You're walking in a room that's on a ground floor in some random warehouse in Manchester. You're walking on tiles. There is no plank. None of it exists. And I can't even get myself to move forward. And I was so in awe of how my brain failed me, right? Because I'm talking to it and I'm like, this doesn't exist. You can't I had to look at the sky and then step off, because I couldn't, with the buildings around me, I just couldn't do it. It was astonishing. It was one of the most profound moments I've had of my brain is a devious bastard and I can't trust it. That was basically my come away point from that hour experience was, oh, this thing does not play with me. Like it's not on my side always.
Totally. I think that's a really important lesson for so many different applications, that your brain is a devious bastard and it is not always telling you the truth about what's happening.
Right.
That's important.
It's wired for safety, not truth, 100% of the time.
So you did jump. Did your wife jump too?
Oh, she jumped. She was fine. She was like, oh, this is scary. And then she did. And the thing that I laughed the most about was when she hit the ground, she was like, ooh. By the time so I was looking up at the sky and I walked off the plank, and then suddenly in my periphery, I'm seeing the buildings. And I had to close my eyes. I didn't even keep my eyes open. Like I'm a scaredy cat. I can't like go on like you know, Ferris wheels and like really tame rides like that you take your kids on. I can't do that. I'm like, I get vertigo watching people on these roller coasters and things like that. So I am a baby with stuff like that for sure. But yeah, I just could not do it. I was so in awe. Like, cause I've said this for years. Oh, your brain isn't wired, you know, to necessarily give you the facts, the figures, the whatever. But yeah, that was one of the realest experiences and lessons I've ever had in that. I guess you just don't get an opportunity in life very often to be presented with two realities that are both kind of true, but one is very clearly a fabrication. Like, apart from like VR, when does that overly happen? It's so fascinating. Sorry, I interrupted you with my random story, right? I took your story about this experience away. Sorry.
No, that, because that is exactly like, that's the point. That's why there's such incredible, we can also talk about the potential dangers of something like this, of this technology, because there are so many applications, some of which are going to be really healing and contribute to human well-being and enhancement and things like that. And other applications might be things that we would want to avoid, you know, because they could could be traumatizing. Like you could have experiences in VR, right, that your body thinks are real. So
Right.
think about like if the future of movies, for instance, is virtual reality movies.
Yeah.
And then you're in those movies, suddenly they're a lot scarier.
Oh, nobody wants to be in like Saw VR or something like that, right? But I know people that do, which concerns me. But but yeah, that's scary. The thought. Yeah, no, I'm not okay. never doing it.
Yeah. And so there's also and when we think about kind of like, for instance, Zoom church services are like, I don't know, it's not the same, right? You can't really like sing together, these kinds of things. But virtual reality, suddenly you do actually have a sense of presence with other bodies. Your body reacts to the presence of those other avatars as if you're there with them, and I don't know, I don't know if anybody has done the research on exactly whether or not it's the same experience as actual physical presence. Probably not.
It's so cutting edge, right? I mean, yeah.
I mean, new, right. And then one of the things that Pastor DJ Soto talked about that was kind of intriguing, even as someone, I don't attend church anymore. Once in a while, actually, since the pandemic started, I started logging in a couple times with my mom to the church that I grew up going to, because that's kind of fun to see all the people and stuff, but otherwise, I don't belong to a church community, even though I have other kind of spiritual ventures that I sort of entertain. But I was so taken aback and kind of not maybe taken aback's not the right word. I was so intrigued by the potential for what Pastor DJ Soto described as kind of potentially coding or developing different types of experiences, virtual reality experiences for the church services. So not only actually kind of recreating a regular service, but also having experiences where maybe you're in a Bible story, for example, or the pastor cultivates an experience of real life where you're sort of navigating a tough situation and have to make some decisions about kind of, how a Christian or whatever tradition it is, how a Christian would behave in such circumstances, or like, to develop compassion or develop kind of skills of equanimity and of love. And so just kind of imagining, and would you try to create a religious or a virtual experience of Jesus, for example? Can you imagine the person in charge?
Yeah.
Like,
this is exactly why the evangelicals get upset by the VR church idea, right? It's just like, it's too unpredictable. We can't, box in what everything's going to look like. You're going to mess with our Jesus.
Yeah.
We don't like black Jesus, never mind alien Jesus. Like, what avatar are you going to give to this guy?
I don't know. And it would be amazing. I mean, maybe the folks who would be brave enough to take that on aren't really the folks that we would want to take it on.
Maybe it becomes a bit of a trolling venture.
Yeah, but even like, switching gears a little bit, like if you think about just the potential to kind of cultivate a contemplative space, too, like I mentioned the technodelics, like that's something that, that people have, what they would call, and I don't use those words like what they would call spiritual. I don't mean to say that to discount that I don't think it's spiritual. I'm just allowing them to speak for their own experience. Sure. People have spiritual experiences with these technologies, technodelics. It's a transformative kind of.
How do they work? How do technodelics work? Because I'm very into psychedelics, very interested in it. I've dabbled in that quite a lot. But I haven't come across technodelics, and I love the technological world. And I'm like, how have I not heard of this? This is fascinating.
Yeah. There's one, for example, called microdose VR, which is supposed to stimulate an experience of microdosing, right? There's another called Sound Self, which is really cool. I would definitely recommend looking into that one. So Sound Self, I hope I can do justice to explaining it. Robin Arnault is the creator of it, and I interviewed him for the book. Just a brilliant insightful guy. And so many of the innovators that I talk to who are interested in developing spirit tech are so genuinely interested in helping folks and of generating kind of greater well-being overall. You know, it's a real vocational calling for a lot of these folks.
Right.
And most of them actually don't have any sort of religious background, but they maybe have, for example, a Silicon Valley background, and they've realized that they want a little bit more, like they want a little bit more depth, you know? So I'm not saying that that's his experience specifically, but it's a common story. So yeah, okay. So sound self is sort of fueled, in a sense, the visuals, and they're kind of just swirling, kind of kaleidoscopic visuals with colors and lines and very abstract, right? And it's fueled by the sound of your voice. So you're kind of doing a toning practice, a chanting practice, right? So you're making sounds that then are sort of like amplified and visually represented in the space. And of course, it's all kind of encompassing. And the idea is that you really just kind of lay back and let this experience flood over you. You're not really doing anything besides that. But it's very meditative, and the point is to kind of potentially put you into a space where you could have something like a mystical experience. And mystical experiences sort of in the literature, like especially the psychedelic assisted psychotherapy literature, mystical experiences, which can be a technical term psychologically, have healing potential. I mean, that's sort of like what makes the difference between a psychedelic experience that seems to have a healing effect and one that just seems like a cool sort of maybe an experience where you learn something, but it doesn't really
absolutely.
So yeah. And then there's another technodelic called Audio Trip VR, and that one you're moving and you're kind of there. You're sort of painting and having kind of digital representation of colors and shapes and stuff swirling all around you. So you're also creating the visuals through your movement. And it's very much kind of a dancing, ecstatic experience. So you know, religions
so
kind of
fascinating
this balance between ecstasy and contemplation, you know, so.
Yeah, I can see how that could be a profound experience, though. I mean, you know, sounds very synesthetic, right? I mean, you're creating color and light and patterns, and you're speaking something into existence, and you're just by shifting something internally, creating something slightly different, creates an outward visual. I mean, that's trippy, right? I mean, that's the whole thing, right? But dissolving one's ego and these kind of things are so kind of central to that kind of process, and just getting lost in something and finding yourself in something that is beyond your body, beyond your own experience. Like it makes sense that these kind of technologies can be used or could be used for these kind of mechanisms. It's interesting to me that you talk about, you know, I think of technology, I rarely think of people who are doing everything they can to better the world. If I'm honest, that might be a side effect a lot of the time. I think a lot of technologies generally are very beneficial to the world and do wonderful things. But generally speaking, I think what drives technology, at least in my jaded view of the technological world, is money, shareholders, profit, retirement in, you know, Barbados with a yacht or something, you know, and like that's the kind of world of technology. It's intriguing to me what happens when technology or people behind technology evolve in their own personal consciousness, their own personal drive, ethic, ethos, and go, I want something more than just a profit. I want something more than my personal, like day-to-day 9 to 5 working for Facebook. If you work 9 to 5 for Facebook, I don't know. But I want to do something with technology that betters oneself, that causes oneself to be more grounded, or actually takes you away from being grounded and causes you to kind of take flight on some level. Like, these things are really fascinating to me. Yeah, what does the future hold as more and more people hopefully keep moving in a similar direction of hopefully a higher enlightened conscious position? I don't know if we could agree that that's the direction humanity's moving in. I think it is. I'm a very optimistic person when I look at the trajectory of humanity across history, but I hope so at least.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Fingers crossed. I mean, I think that we're in this really strange moment where our technological advancements have outpaced our ability to deal with them very healthily. Yeah. So yeah, we're sort of in this place where we're going to have to really push back against the values that have taken over that space, which you're right, is profit, efficiency, speed, greed, obsession. I mean, the whole point of so many social media sites is to make you more and more obsessed. Like that is what they want to do.
Addict you.
They want to addict you. Yeah. So that's the value that's driving the innovation. And a lot of times it is the folks who are, it's a certain type of person, but there are more and more, I think, that we're seeing emerge from areas like Silicon Valley who are the most kind of acutely aware. And they say, yeah, they're the ones who are not allowing their, because they see kind of how the sausage is made, like you said earlier, and they realize the limitations and the potential damaging effects of these kinds of values, which are leading the charge, right. And then also kind of the unintended consequences of the technologies themselves, or the intended consequences. So who knows? But yeah, so for that reason, but I would say that technology, like kind of decoupling the word technology from sort of the connotation that we usually use, and just understanding it as kind of like this thing, technology, right, as like something that human beings, Homo sapiens, have done since the beginning of time. This is what makes us human, is that we create, right. I mean, we create technologies and structures and ways of living that allow us to live in any environments that we have no business living in, but through our technology, this is how we do this, this is what humans do. So it's very like quintessential part of what humans do. And there have always been upsides and downsides to any technology that we've developed, consequences and unintended consequences, things like this. And so there's no reason that the technology that we have today, screens and beeps and blings and wires and, I've got my Apple Watch, it's telling me all sorts of things about how my body's working, right. There's no reason necessarily that technology needs to be driven by these values of profit and greed and efficiency and, but for some reason, an obsession, but for some reason that is historically how it's manifested in our culture. Right? So, yeah, I do think that the spirit tech innovators are pushing back hard. That's their mission. And it's not to say that all of them are, I was sort of selective in who, and Wesley and I were sort of selective in who we decided to interview for the book. We tried to kind of find, but a lot of the folks are just very genuinely aware of the damaging effects that technology has had so far. And they see it as not only their goal to increase human well-being, but actually to heal the relationship that humans have with, so that it can be something that can be life-giving and actually cultivate some well-being and enhance our lives in positive ways, not just these oppressive ways, Yeah. So, yeah, I do have a lot of hope too, Some days it's easier than other days, I think, to maintain that hope, and hope that we even know that far. With
usually directly linked to how often I open Facebook on a day or something. not opened Facebook for months, thankfully. But I was thinking about this recently because I've been going through some health issues for the last couple of months. And one of the things I've been really intentionally trying to do is take the first 2 to 3 hours of the day and not look at any technology, just spend time meditating, doing yoga, Tai Chi, just contemplating, like really taking some time out. And I remember day one, I'm like, right, so I'll just leave all my tech upstairs. I'll go downstairs into my back room and kind of just sit. And we've got a big, huge window that outlooks over the garden. And I'm just like, I'm just going to sit here. I'm going to meditate. I'm going to do some Tai Chi. And I'm like, oh crap, I can't meditate. I need my phone to pull up a insight timer or a headspace or whatever, right? It doesn't really matter. But I'm like, give me a guided meditative practice. I can meditate without it, but I'm like, my meditation will go better if someone is talking me through it. So I run upstairs, get my phone and do that. And I'm like, okay, great. I think I'll do a yoga. I think a yoga would really kind of like just get in my body and things. And I'm like, crap, I'll go get my iPad so I can open it up and pull up YouTube and load a yoga thing so I can do it along with it. And I'm just conscious. And I'm like, I think I'll read that book I've been meaning to read about being self-compassionate by Paul Gilbert. I've been read about half it and I've liked it, but I never did finish it. I'll read the rest of that. And I'm like, crap, it's on Kindle. So I get my Kindle. And by the end of the morning, I had intended to avoid technology because it was going to, derail me. It was going to stress me out. It was going to increase my anxiety. It was going to negatively affect my health. And actually, I used pretty much all my technological devices, but I put them all on airplane mode. As soon as I grab them, airplane mode, get downstairs, and I just load up an offline, yoga offline meditation. And I was like, I used all those things. At the end of the morning, I felt fantastic. I felt great. I managed to put myself into my work and have a great day. And it really struck home because I always say this, but it is really hard to recognize that these are amoral devices in and of themselves. Well, you could argue that, all the precious metals that are mined by slave kids and stuff like that. But apart from that, right, let's not look too closely at that because we all use them. But apart from that, it's circuit boards, it's ones and zeros. It's maybe the intention behind the person that's coding it is putting, trying to trick you into clicking as many ads as you like and who knows, whatever. But this phone is not your enemy. It can be your best friend. It can be a tool. It can be a path to finding peace of mind, to finding security, safety, presence in your body, to be here now, to, whatever your language, enlightenment. It can be a tool for that. And, I listen to all my podcasts on my phone. That, that's a beautiful, amazing thing that has expanded my life. And we talked about audiobooks, or heck, half the books I read are on Kindle. When I travel, I can't carry 5 books with me. I want to take my Kindle. They're an amazing opportunity for us to engage with spiritual practice, whatever our definition of spiritual may ebb and flow, or yeah.
Absolutely. We're definitely at a place where we talk about like digital detoxes, and we sort of like are in awe of people who say, "Oh, I turn off my phone at 5 p.m." And it's like, what? what?
Right.
How do you do yoga? Exactly. But so we're really past the point of no return in terms of these things being a part of our lives for the most part, in our culture, more or less. And so it's not a matter of like, is this good or bad? It's really just a matter of how are we going to manage this? How are we going to navigate this new challenge, this new tech challenge, and this new potentiality, because there is so much potential there for wellness, right? And to enhance our wellness, just like you experienced in the morning. So it's just a matter of being very intentional and asking the very specific questions, like, what is it about this device that is going to ruin my morning? It's the internet. It's the alerts.
Right. So, it's all the people on the other side.
And maybe it works, but yeah, so it's interesting, Mikey Siegel, who's kind of a thought leader in the trans tech space and the spirit tech space. He's brilliant mind, MIT trained roboticist, did the whole kind of like traditional engineer route, and then pivoted towards creating spirit tech stuff. And he himself has a couple kind of technologies that he's created and cultivated, and actually is one of the people who's very interested in creating, using tech to create ritual spaces with groups of people, and using it as a form of connection, which we can get in that out if you want. But he he's also a speaker and teaches at Stanford and things like that, and talks a lot about kind of one of the important things that we're going to have to think about when we think about, you know, the healthfulness and the dangers and the safety and kind of like just these types of questions with spirit tech are those values that are driving the production? Because if your value is to create obsessed, dependent users, that is what you'll get. And that is how we feel, right? That is how we'll feel. And so I think this is one of the main critiques, not that particularly, but this type of critique is of Facebook, right? That it really has created this space of division. And not to say that that was the actual intention of the creators. I don't think it was, but it was an unintended consequence that maybe wasn't thought through fully, right? Something. So if you come at it with values that are completely different, if you come at it with values that are of enhancement, that you're actually you have a value to not make people dependent on this, and you want to do whatever you can in the coding and in the creation of this device, so that people are never dependent, you know, and they're never obsessed, which is hard, right? Because that's not a great business model.
No, it's not. No.
But that's why the values have to be reflected on constantly and have to be, you'd have to be reminded of constantly in terms of like the engineers and the coders who are doing this. So for instance, in chapter 2, we tell the story of Jay Sanguinetti and Shinzen Young. Jay Sanguinetti is a neuroscientist who is developing brain stimulation protocol for meditation enhancement. And Shinzen Young is a meditation teacher who is working, a lifelong meditation teacher, has been teaching and traveling around the world, educated in Japan, was part of what am I thinking of? A Shingon temple in Japan, and now teaches all over the world. So they're working together, you know, so constantly are reminding themselves of their mission, which is basically to create a device that can help people learn to meditate, kind of like training wheels, right? So meditation is hard, especially in our current world where we're very, very distracted and very overloaded all the time with our brain. It's hard, right? But, and so there's some ways in which even getting through kind of like the front gate is prohibitively difficult for some folks. Or, I mean, they could do it if they had the time, but they've got screaming kids and things like that, you know? So the idea is to create a device that kind of helps boost them, helps train their brain to enter a state that maybe it's never been before, you know? And once the brain enters that state a few times, learns a new pathway, you know, learns a new route, learns some new neuronal connections, then you get to a point where you don't need the device anymore. You know? So the point of the device is to make the device irrelevant. Right. You know? So again, like not the best business model, but it is the best model for developing. And, you know, they might describe it differently at this point. So this is sort of a general kind of goal. But yeah, so yeah, those are just kind of some of the types of questions that seem important when you're thinking not only about, you know, from the developer's point of view, which of course I'm not a developer, I just kind of study them and I'm fascinated by the fact that they're even doing this. And then also from kind of a potential user point of view, you know, so kind of thinking like, what place would this have in my life? You know, would this be a healthy addition to my meditation practice or something like that, you know? Because you don't want something that you're dependent on too much, you know?
Right, exactly. Well, no one wants, you know, the meditation app that like halfway through goes, and now an advertisement from Domino's. Do you fancy a pizza right now? Like, you know, like, I'm hungry. Yeah, I'm going to stop meditating and go order my Domino's. You know, like, it's going to happen, right? Someone's going to figure out that one. But I was thinking about it because one of the I forgot to put it on flight mode, and one of the YouTube clips that I watched on yoga the other day had an ad right in the middle, and I'm like in like tree pose, like really centered. I'm looking into the garden at my distant place, and I'm balanced, and then suddenly it's like some advertisement for another yoga thing, or, you know, it's like targeted, I guess. But like, I'm like, and I have to like get out of repo so I can hit skip ads because I don't want to watch the 3-minute ad it actually is. I've watched my 5 seconds or 30 seconds or whatever. And I'm like, that was not a good experience. Like if you're making YouTube, like guided YouTube ads, don't put like ads in the actual video, but at the beginning and the end. I'll even watch them for you if you want, but like, no, I won't watch them. I'll still hit skip. But like, it just shows this lack of awareness. It's a prime example why YouTube or Google are not at the forefront of this, right? Because they are going to go, well, can we stick an ad in there somewhere, right? Or can we steal their data and sell it to someone else? I don't know. Can we put a chip in them somehow, or like listen to them in their room when they think they're talking in private? Like, we want that stuff. We want the good stuff, right? We don't want to help them become enlightened and more conscious. And more enlightened and more conscious people, they don't make more money, right? It's like all the psychedelic hippies taking all the psychedelics in the 50s and the 60s. They banned that shit quick because they all stopped spending money, right? They were like, materialism and capitalism, and we don't need that. And oh, whoa, that's that's maybe partially conspiracy theory. I don't know, but like that feels like a big driving force behind these kind of mechanisms. Is like, is this going to keep making us money? And it does intrigue me as we see more and more people pushing these things, because this is huge. It's one of the biggest growing industries, right? Type in meditation app into your app store, right? It's like endless. Every week I'm introduced to a new one. Or you open up certain ones and it's like, this has 100,000 meditations you can pick from. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm paralyzed. I felt I had too many choices when I first got Headspace like years ago, and it had like 3 meditations to choose from. I was like, oh my God, which one do I pick? It's out of control in a sense. And I am really intrigued by the ethics of it. And I'm intrigued by the ethics of the people behind it, because there probably will be people on a whole spectrum here. That we're engaging with. It's really interesting.
And even the best folks, who maybe start with good intentions, like they also got to pay their bills and they got to play the game and they got to, so it's not like a good and evil kind of situation, although
sure.
It's that way. And sometimes, maybe people cross the line too far and you're like, okay, now you're no longer trying that hard. But yeah, I think that this is going to continue to be a really vibrant and really important conversation, which is why I think it's so important for all different sorts of people to be a part of the conversation, including people like religion scholars who, on the one hand, like you think, what business do these 2 religion scholars have to kind of evaluate this situation? But we're really putting these kinds of technologies into the context of something like, the history of religion and spirituality, and saying like, look, I think that these are questions that are kind of age-old human questions about how we create communities, like how we decide collectively what our values are and what we're gonna and even if you talk about it from a monetary point of view, thinking like how are consumers going to value these types of products and these types of efforts to create these products, because it isn't cheap to create anything.
No, absolutely.
Something like a brain stimulation device, it's actually not as expensive as you might think it would be, I suppose. But the science takes a lot of money. It takes a lot of time. It's not a fast process. It's a slow process, but it is something that I think is worth thinking about and worth valuing. Actually. So yeah, it'll just be really interesting to see how the next, decade or so shakes out in terms of how we continue to learn the balances for tech in our lives, because whether we like it or not. And it's probably the case that tech is going to be part of people's spiritual lives, and so so I'd encourage people. I share everyone's skepticism. This is not it's not like a danger-free zone.
Right.
There's a lot that could go wrong. So, which is why I think it's important to have conversations about it, So.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think you hit the nail on the head when you said, this isn't going away. You can be the parent that hides your kid from the iPad for as long as possible, but at some point they're going to get a phone, they're going to be sitting on it. Like it's surely on some level a better practice to teach them how to engage with technology well, teach them how it can be a tool for these amazing ways to better yourself and to educate and to practice mindful practices or whatever it is. There's got to be better ways to engage with technology rather than either being like fully a slave to it or like, completely free from it. That just seems so, that's just very dualistic in its extreme position, which I know our society loves this kind of extreme dualistic kind of positions. I was thinking, as you're saying that, I'm thinking even the way we go about creating content, creating services, how we go about funding those is changing and evolving all the time. I look at I'm looking at yoga practice. I've been doing more of that regularly, and I'm finding a couple of people on YouTube, and I'm like, these are the two kind of people I'm going to watch the most. You know what? I'm going to join their Patreon, give them $5 a month and be able to access it on a website somewhere without ads. But also I value these two people. And you know what, for $5 a month, I'd pay like, whatever, £5 a month for Headspace or for, some other, I do it for Netflix or whatever. Like, but this is, a really important practice to me. I'm willing to put whatever that is, $60 a year. It's like, yeah, that's worth it for me to have a great yoga practice. And I want that person to hopefully make more than $60 a year, right? Hopefully there's hundreds of people who do that. And, they get to pay their bills and they get to have a mortgage and whatever, because even though your old traditional grandma might look and go, wow, you can't pay the bills doing yoga on the internet, like, come on, Jimmy, you need to try harder, you need to get back into a corporate ladder. Like, I do think that we're seeing a radical overview of overhaul of what the future looks like for work, for creation, and these kind of things. I mean, technology is massively impacting just a lot of positions of labor in our current society, and you can again look at that as a negative thing or a positive thing. I think a lot of that is going to go in different ways, but yeah.
I think just like you were kind of saying before, it's value neutral, really, and it will have negative consequences. There will be people for whom it does not work and it's not good, and then there will be situations where you have kind of predatory folks who come in and promise that you can make millions of dollars on the internet, and then it turns out you cannot. Right. So, or at least through that person.
That method, yeah.
So exactly. I mean, but to then put all sort of like online money-making ventures or online creative practices in that same kind of bucket just doesn't make sense either, So it's, again, just kind of this. It really is a new negotiation of how we're doing these things. And it's kind of uncharted territory to a certain extent, I mean, it's incredible, the content creators who have kind of sprouted up in the past few years and who do make a living with their online content and create incredible movies or whatever it is, I mean, I'm so impressed with some of these content. Very cool. Yeah. And even the way that kind of corporations are structured, I mean, fingers crossed that some of that kind of shifts too with this coming tide, just in terms of the values and the sort of hierarchical structures and things like that. It just seems like it's kind of gotten to a point where it's not serving our communities very well. But there's one example that Mikey Siegel gives sometimes of a person named Soryu for All, Soryu for All, SORYU for All. And he runs a monastic academy for the preservation of life on Earth. And basically this academy is this ashram for the modern world, where it's a bunch of kind of creative folks. You have to kind of apply to get in, and you go and live in this place. And it's sort of a marriage between lightning speed internet, and just having all of the resources available to do the cutting edge research and technology and development, engineering development for this kind of stuff. And then also it's an ashram where you're required to meditate and do a bunch of the practices, kind of these traditional practices, right? That are meant to cultivate a sense of meant to cultivate values, basically, that are then hopefully infused into the work that you're doing. So rather than, for example, sometimes we hear of like mindfulness-based practices used sort of like people try to harness them for like peak performance, meaning like
Right.
more productivity, more speed.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's like, you know, it's a little ironic that these kind of ancient practices are being harnessed for these sort of, capitalistic goals. But so this is trying something different. This is saying no, like the practices, of meditation, contemplation, and creating a space where those can really be cultivated and mastered and kind of taken on in such a way that they can then infuse the work. The idea is that the work that is produced is more life-giving, and more and healthier, basically, for the people that it touches and affects. So that kind of thing seems so it seems idealistic, but it exists,
Right. Yeah,
why not have more of that, as we learn. And this is, again, like, as we're learning about how the human brain works, how the human brain cultivates values, we can talk all day about how great mindfulness is, but if you don't actually do the mindfulness practices, you don't get it.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
So
and if you do the mindfulness practices, if you don't have a good teacher, if you don't have the right, technologies there or people, but a lot of us don't have a person on our block or, in our house that can teach us. We are relying on these technologies to bring us into these kind of practices and things. And it is incredible what a day to be alive, I even as I was looking at mindfulness practices and yoga practices, even more in recent months, I've been trying to figure out, like, how can I stop watching rich, white, 20-year-old girls that all look identical teach me what, Kundalini yoga is. I'm like, I 100% guarantee they have never spent a second anywhere else other than, like, Southern California. Like, they have not gone and really studied Kundalini in India or, and so really just thinking of, like, gosh, I just need to diverse and looking, like, I'm not just typing and clicking the first one that clicks on YouTube, but I'm actually going, can I find someone from India that's going to teach me this practice and actually teach me the kind of some of the core components of it, really teach me what the kriyas are and things like, like, and I'm suddenly aware, like, oh my gosh, whoa, if I look beyond the algorithm, that, like, the world is our oyster. We are living in this golden age where information is there, videos are there, education is there, guidance is there, mentoring and deciding. Some of these people are like, yeah, they don't have big followings because they aren't the first on the algorithm, and they're like, oh yeah, just send me a DM if you have questions about this and I'll reply. And I'm like, that's awesome. Like, this is amazing. I get to speak to a yogi about yoga, ask them a question. I don't even know what to ask, but I'm excited. I'll probably never even do it because I'm too terrified, but I'm excited about this world. It's an incredible time to be alive. We live in this exciting time. Something I'm intrigued, and I would love your thoughts on this, is we live in an exciting time. I say we really loosely because I am excited about it. And many, many people I know are excited about this because many people I'm closest to are wired to want change, to grow, to evolve, to self-inquire, to explore new technologies, whatever they might be, to educate themselves. These things that I'm mentioning are not the cornerstones of most religions as we know them. Generally speaking, almost all religion is rooted in tradition. It's rooted in repeated practice and yes, technologies, but technologies that have been slowly introduced within periods of hundreds of years, and yes, have evolved, right? So you look at how Christianity evolves into from Judaism, how it evolves into Islam and things, and different practices and different technologies come into play. But those are over hundreds of years and involved thousands, if not millions, of people dying at times over it. It wasn't an easy process. And I do wonder, how do you see those traditional religions engaging with these technologies? You know, you mentioned, you know, there's an evangelical pastor who's like, let's do VR church, but he's not particularly liked by other evangelicals now. Do you see potential for technology? Do you think it takes something like the pandemic? Do you think the church needs the church or the, you know, Islam or whatever it might be? Do you think these religious institutions need a crisis to push them into new technology, or do you see it emerging and coming onto the stage?
Yeah, it's so interesting. I mean, absolutely. Religious traditions are so, they're very complex sort of social structures, right? In many ways, they are adaptive. My dissertation talks about really complex adaptive systems. So very complex and adaptive. Like they will adapt to the environment, right? Slowly, like you said, but they are systems. So they have these interlocking pieces, right? If you think about them kind of objectively as this, like, if you think about it kind of like as an alien, you know, coming down and looking at humans like, oh, look at these weird social structures that they have and do these things about them. Yes. So and some of the most conservative institutions that humans have come up with, right? They conserve.
Sure. Yeah.
I don't mean conservative, like politically conservative or even
no, but to just stay the same is their goal, right? I mean, generally, if not move backwards sometimes, right? I mean,
tradition, to preserve this like heritage or understanding, to preserve knowledge that's come from our elders, you know, these kinds of things. So it's not nice, you know, that's what the point is. But also, there's always been elements in traditions that are progressive, that are like mystical teachings. So oftentimes mystical practices are controlled by the system. Like if someone gets a little too mystical and a little too out there, then maybe the tradition comes and says, no, like you're not allowed to think in that way, you know, or go that direction. That's a little too much, you know? So even the mystical practices are sometimes constrained by the tradition. And if someone gets a little too mystical, starts asking a little too many questions or whatever, maybe they're let go from the tradition or they start their own. Maybe that's part of the evolutionary process, is that it's a kind of, if you think about it like in evolutionary terms, like it's a variation that attracts kind of maybe new people. Like it becomes a little bit of an adaptive variation in its own right and starts a new thing, you know?
Sure.
So yeah, there's, and you know, religious organizations have been part of revolutionary events in good ways and bad ways. And so, you know, there is sort of, I think that the urge to conserve and the urge to kind of this impulse is, this traditional impulse is probably stronger, just, you know, in terms of quantity and just in terms of maintaining the tradition. But there is also that kind of innovative impulse too. So in that sense, like sometimes I do kind of wonder, you know, there are those, you know, even though not hardly any evangelical folks were interested in jumping on board with Pastor DJ Soto was there and he did do a thing.
Right.
You know? So he's coming from that tradition, kind of like, so he's one example of those folks that kind of push, you know, and we always have folks. So in terms of most of the spirit tech modalities, at least the ones that we talk about in the book, like we're talking about brain stimulation, we're talking about neurofeedback, psychedelics, you know, virtual reality, these kinds of things. I don't know. It's hard to imagine very many traditional, the religious traditions that we have right now taking on very much of that. I could kind of imagine it, you know, in terms of what it could look like. For example, neurofeedback is non-invasive. Neurofeedback is basically a system that reads the brain waves that your brain is producing. And this is old science. This is a new application of science. It's been around for not that long. Science is very quick, you know, but
sure.
Yeah, we know that our brain produces electrical waves and that those electrical waves kind of indicate different types of brain activity, you know? And so if the tech reads your brain waves and then gives your brain positive reinforcement, via either visuals or auditory. So sounds, beeps and stuff, beeps that your brain finds pleasurable.
Sure.
Actually might think it's kind of annoying to hear this beep, but your brain likes it. It's kind of like that VR thing,
Right.
So
Yeah.
the brain hears the beeps, the dings, and kind of responds to it by creating more of the rewarded brainwaves.
Mm.
So it can look at different brainwaves in different areas of the brain, depending on what you're kind of trying to do. This has been a pretty effective form of treatment for ADHD, which is really interesting. I'm not endorsing that. I'm not a doctor in that way.
Right.
There has been some research. So the idea is that this kind of positive reinforcement of certain types of brain waves can help lead your brain into a meditative state. Right? So it's non-invasive. It's not a big deal. It's not like it's like changing anything. But you can imagine, just imagine that you're in a church and they say, okay, so we're going to kind of move on to the part of the service that's more contemplative. Maybe it's right before the Eucharist, before they take communion or something. And so it's sort of this moment in the service where you're preparing your heart and mind to receive the Spirit, or to be more kind of, my dog is going to start barking.
It's okay.
I might have to let him out here. So maybe this headset, maybe everyone takes out their headsets that's like right beside the hymnal or something. They put them on for a few minutes and maybe kind of like get their brains settled into this space,
Sure, yeah.
Is that something that churches would go for? Maybe, maybe it's one of those.
So hard to say.
I remember like back in the day, I mean, at least for like, in some of the churches that I was aware of, like some churches might have folks who are interested in kind of contemporary music, and then there are other people who are not interested.
Yeah. Over my dead body, we'll have drums in this church, or whatever it was, right?
Yeah. So
yeah, it's interesting to look at it as evolution, as different offshoots, and certain ones are more likely to die than others, and it will be really interesting to see how the church adapts to, I mean, the church is already trying to adapt. The church is already trying to figure out, how do we bring all these people that are leaving back in and whatever. And for most of the people that have left, the answer is you have a lot of work to do, right? Because it's not going to happen. You always need to close the door and start again as something completely new, never mind adapt, and it's going to be really interesting to see, for sure. Have you come across, I'm intrigued as to what your thoughts are on this, but I remember reading an article a while back about different technologies that look at how we are going to push human physical evolution with technology, in the sense that it feels like in some ways we've hit a wall as far as evolution. It certainly physically, certainly as far as we are likely to see in any time, in this shape. Physical evolution just takes such a long time. But there's this kind of branch of technology which looks at basically adapting humans. Can we enhance ourselves? I saw one of the things that they did was they installed this chip in this woman who, what it meant was when she saw things, she could smell them. And so basically it was based on how visually pleasurable something was. She received a good smell or a bad smell for her. And they didn't program any of this. It kind of adapted automatically and created that, or tricked her brain into thinking she's smelling something as well, seeing something nice. I have no idea, right? But apparently Brad Pitt smelled better than me, or, I don't know, like, I mean, like it just did something. You saw a flower from far off and you could smell the flower, or whatever. You could see it on TV and you'd smell it, and I look at that and I'm like, gosh, we are messing with what it is to be human. And I get excited, right? I don't have a cautious bone when it comes to technology. I'm too like excited by stuff. Yeah. But I'm so intrigued by that. I think religion is definitely, religion has a hard time with playing God and genetic modification and all kinds of different things that we're already pushing, that maybe I do have a problem with genetic stuff. It can be really interesting ethically. But yeah, do you have thoughts on these components of what does it look like to start messing with who we are? Even consciousness is a question. The question of consciousness and what consciousness is, and as we start to become more overlapping, as certainly our machines become more powerful, independent AI, all that kind of stuff. But even as that kind of merges, and maybe we don't even have so clear cut a line between AI and humans. I was reading the other day about a guy who has learned to write through a machine. He's paralyzed from the neck down, but if he thinks about writing, he has to think about handwriting, not just the words. It will literally write on a bit of paper for him. So now he can talk to his loved ones and things like that. And you're going, is this guy fully human? Is he part machine? Because on some level, there's a bleed there. There's something going on. And again, I think that raises interesting spiritual, certainly religious questions. That I don't know if we know what we're going to do with that stuff moving forward. Certainly, yeah. I just get excited. So I don't know. I'm the hugely irresponsible person when it comes to this stuff. I'm just like, well, let's see what happens if we make this guy more robot.
Yeah. No, I think it's so interesting. And I think you're right about the impulse. Like most of the folks who are most interested in the trans tech space and spirit tech space are not really interested in going slow enough to accommodate conservative religious traditions.
Right.
They're just kind of like, okay, if you're not into it, that's fine. We're going to do it over here.
Right.
And so being it might, rather than directly building upon existing religious traditions, it might be folks who maybe either just left religious traditions and so still have some sort of intuitive grasp about what aspects maybe did work, and then maybe they're able to kind of like apply those to something new with the brain stimulation headsets or something like that, and move forward that way. Or maybe it's just folks who have never been religious and are just sort of interested in creating a new ritual, a new way of cultivating values and things like that. So I don't know, but yeah, especially when you're thinking about transhumanism stuff, like what you're describing with like major forms of human modification, of inserting any type of microchip of any sort into the human body, which a lot of people really shudder at. For some reason, it doesn't scare me maybe as much as it should either.
I get pretty excited about it. I kind of want an NFC somewhere so I can make my, my quick Apple Pay at the till with my hands. So I don't get my phone out. I'm chip me up real quick. If someone could put GPS in me so that I can figure out where I am when I'm lost, I'm in. Chip me all day. I'll take 3 or 4 different chips that do different things. But yeah, it does kind of have, even if you're not super end of the world kind of focused as a Christian, even if you're a bit more of a chill Christian, it still feels a little mark of the beastie, a little bit. You're like maybe going to err on the side of caution when it comes to people giving you chips, right? That you can literally buy bread with, right? On some level.
Absolutely. And then there's also, from the kind of the other side of the spectrum, folks like, we're both, white people. And so it's easier maybe for us to conceptualize having a microchip with my medical records on it so that I don't have to worry about my medical records versus, anybody of color who's like, nope, like, you're not tracking me. You're not putting a number.
Absolutely.
And so there's just so many things to consider in terms of the value and ethics of anything like that. But absolutely, it's another one of these things that's like, but is this just happening whether we like it or not? And so rather than saying no, zero transhumanism things, we are never going to open up the human body and put something foreign into it. Well, we've already done that. We already have mechanical knees or whatever. I don't really know anything about things, but we do surgery on human bodies all the time to put in to fix things that are wrong with our joints, for example. Sure, right. In pins when you got a broken bone, and obviously that's so completely different than any sort of tracking thing, and anything that's going to affect consciousness. Which, of course, that even just the realization, sort of like the obvious statement of that bones matter less than consciousness. We all know that, but there's something deeper that we're pointing to, even in that moment, even in that recognition. It's like, okay, why? What is it about our consciousness? Well, it's spiritual, it is like, it's inescapably spiritually relevant. And so these are spiritual questions, and even folks who have never been religious or who, consider themselves fully atheists, like if they're made uncomfortable at all by the idea of kind of hacking consciousness, or even just, maybe not, maybe uncomfortable is the wrong word, but, just recognizing the potential for corrupt forces to take hold and understanding not something we want. I mean, that we always have, no matter what technology is put out there, it will be taken up by folks who you don't want it to be. So there's always going to be that recognition and kind of awareness and just interest from, I think, from communities to support the folks who they hope are going to be doing it, ethically, I think.
Right. Yeah. Which ultimately, if you're concerned about this, you probably are on the right side of the spectrum, right? It's the age-old thing of like, well, if we don't do it, like the person that is the least ethical will. And so do you really want them on the bleeding edge of this technology? Like, really? Is that what you want? And I know that argument falls down. It has its caveats and so on. But yeah, no, I think, if we ban the production and evolution of AI in certain parts of the world, someone out there is going to do it without us, and it's not going to be good in their hands, right? So let's maybe not just ban it. Let's maybe talk about, should we just set some healthy parameters around it or whatever? I totally agree. It's fantastic. Anyway, Kate, I can see, poor dog, I see his head in the door just thinking like, can I get out? So why don't we wrap up, because I know you've been great. Oh, gorgeous.
Yeah, he's cute, isn't he?
Oh, I'm so in envy. The thing I have wanted the most during lockdown, I've wanted a dog for a while, but during lockdown especially, I've just been like, oh gosh, I want to get a dog. But we have held on strong, and I think probably long term. We'll get a dog one day, but right now, not the time to do it. So I've held on strong.
Best, because I just read an article about a bunch of people who got dogs during lockdown and then sort of realized maybe that didn't actually fit into their.
Yep. Well, me and my wife both work from home, and so we kind of know long term it would work well. But I think more than anything, I'm just aware like all the pounds are empty right now and they're just hounded. But I have a feeling they're all going to fill up real quick, and I'd rather be on the other end of that than getting dogs when they're flying off the shelf or wherever people put dogs. Probably not on shelves, but anyway, yeah. Okay, so people can check out the book. It's called Spirit Tech.
Yep. Spirit Tech, Brave New World of Consciousness Hacking and Engineering Enlightenment, or Enlightenment Engineering. I always say it wrong. Yeah. And like I said,
and that just came out, right? I mean, it's literally days ago, right?
Yeah, actually 1 week ago today. So last.
Yes. Okay.
Well, yeah, the 18th of May. So yeah.
Wonderful.
Why don't I just, okay, so if we're closing up, I just want to read this quote, which is.
Oh, please do. Yeah.
It's like a great way to kind of wrap up exactly what we were just talking about with kind of the AI and the dangers and potentials and stuff. So this quote is from Sophia, who is one of the world's most advanced humanoid robots. If you haven't ever Googled Sophia AI, you should, because there's lots of videos of her. And she learns. She's a learning robot, right? So as you see her over the years, you see her get smarter and smarter, right? And so someone asked her about the kind of dangers and the potentials of AI, and like, can AI ever be human-esque? Like, is that our intention, is to create actual robots or AI that can feel and think and have empathy? I mean, it seems so bizarre to even suggest these things, and yet if you watch her behave, it's fascinating. So interesting. Anyways, she says that the intentions of the folks creating the AI is what matters. Okay, so her quote is, "It's sort of like how the moon reflects the light of the sun. The moon may not have a light of its own, but we still say that the moon shines. In much the same way, AI reflects the emotions and values of the people who make us." So it's funny, right, that she comes up with this quote by herself, right?
Right.
But so just in general, technology in general, right? Tech is amoral in a sense, right? The potential to create tech,
Sure.
but what it does it reflects, like the moon reflects the sun, it reflects the people who are making it. So
Right.
Cool.
I remember, fun story, but I remember when I was a teenager, so this must be like 15, 20 years. It's actually a very late teens, maybe early 20s. But I remember there was this AI online that you could, I think it was called HAL. And basically it would learn from everyone talking to it. And so the goal was you stuck it online, people talk to it, and it like learns. It basically at the beginning can just parrot what you say, but it starts to pick up what mannerisms are in normal conversation. And then it picks up, oh, that's a normal response to this. And so it starts to kind of piece together. And over like a few years, the goal was it would become much like Sophia, this profound, wise person that knows everything, that would be able to structure. And it very quickly became the most horrific, awful version of humanity you could. It was racist, it was xenophobic, it was horrible, it would cuss everywhere, it was the worst person ever. And I think it's the perfect picture of, you know, I'm sure there are some really, really smart, wonderful, incredible people behind Sophia. And I think if it was left to all of humanity, right, if you were left this anonymous blank slate, you have the 4chans, you have the 8chans, you have these places where no one really would feel safe if they were physical spaces you could go and hang out. No one wants an AI that's completely representational of all of humanity. No one wants humans that are representational of that, right? We want the best human. So absolutely, that's a beautiful, man. That's, if you told me that was a quote from a person, I'd be like, gosh, that's a profound, beautiful way to put it. Like, I'm so impressed. But like the thought that is a computer, right, that isn't conscious, at least as much as we can know or understand these things. Yeah, it's exciting, it's scary, it's everything at once, right? It's beautiful. Kate, can people be following your work and tracking with you? What are you working on in the future? Are you working on, have you got another book in your sights? Or are you focusing more on your academic stuff? Or
I mean, I have some ideas. I would like to turn my dissertation into a book potentially, but then I also kind of have some ideas about I don't know, you know, these are very much nascent ideas, but
right.
I would love to tell some of the stories of particularly, and kind of talk about some aspects of gender in the spirit tech world. So kind of almost like a sequel to spirit tech that looks at some of the innovators, the women innovators behind there. Because I met a few of them and they're just such badasses, you know, and I just feel like this, you know, many industries are male dominated, but I think the tech industry has a specific kind of vibe that I'd love to tell their stories. So we'll see, you know, if that comes to fruition or anything. But I think that there are many. I hope that this book is kind of a conversation starter in terms of.
Sure.
So there's so much more to say. I mean, barely.
Absolutely.
You know, so yeah. So I'll continue kind of thinking in these ways, and yeah, people can follow me on Twitter. I haven't been super active because I've been busy finishing my dissertation and stuff, but yeah, that's probably the best place to.
Okay, what's your handle for Twitter?
Kate J Stockley, I believe. Oh my goodness.
Okay, I'll touch base with you after this just to check or whatever. That's fine. Best check before I put it all out on the internet and people start like harassing a complete stranger or something.
I see it now. Kate J Stockley.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Oh, that's great. Kate, I have loved this. Like you said, I mean, I could have talked to you for hours. We scraped the surface. And I'm sure if I'd managed to read the book, gosh, we could have talked for even like just, it's probably a good thing that we didn't, because I would have never let you go. I'd have just badgered you with more and more questions. But this is great. Maybe we'll have you back on at some point. I'd love to talk to you about gender roles within spirit tech and stuff like that anyway. So even if you don't get around to writing a book, I'd love to talk to you for a couple of hours about it. So maybe we can do that in the future. But this has been really wonderful. Appreciate you making the time. And thank you to your wee guy as well for putting up and not getting out for his morning wee or whatever he's waiting for.
My partner came home. He had been kind of out, and so he just came home, and so the dog Fitz heard him come home and wanted to go check it out.
Right. Okay. Way more interesting than what's going on in here, right?
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. This was such a delight. So
wonderful.
Hope to talk to you again sometime.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Catch you later, Kate.
Bye. Bye.
If you are deconstructing, there is no reason to do this alone. It can be an incredibly lonely process, but the deconstructionnetwork.com is a free resource to help you find others deconstructing in your local area. If you would like to support what I do, everything I do is for free, from talking to people for hours on end to producing resources and podcasts. It is only possible because people give generously. There's never any need to give. It will always be free, everything I do. But if you do, we do have an amazing private community group that we talk on over on Discord that you would gain access to. And we do regular audio and video chats on there as well. So it'd be great to see you in there. But of course, never any requirement. And of course, please, please, please come and talk to me on Instagram. I love connecting with people. I love helping people on their journey. If you need a safe space to process your deconstruction, I would love to connect. It's just at Phil Drysdale. Love every one of you. Peace.